As this pandemic drags on, I'm more willing to admit to bouts of hopelessness. Not that I haven't had those bouts in the past, but I'm more willing to admit to them now. Fortunately for me, they don't last that long these days. However, they seem to be coming more frequently, even if they are shorter, as this pandemic drags on. Just as we seem to be getting to the point where we think there is some progress with this pandemic, it seems that in the next news cycle, something changes. For me, one of the bright spots was going to be that we were going to be able to return to local soccer. It was set to happen this weekend, and then it came. 5 o'clock yesterday, Friday afternoon, the city sends out an email. Following the recommendation of the region's public health officials, the city decided that not all contact sports had to stop their games, stop their scrimmages, and revert to training only where people could physically distance. And while all that seems quite logical, when I take a step back from it and I understand why the decision was made, it still feels as if the situation's a bit hopeless. We had just progressed, just ready to start, and yet the pandemic calls us to take a step back. So why would that bring a feeling of hopelessness if I understand the logic of the decision? Well, quite frankly, it feels hopeless because there's nothing I can do about it. I wear a mask when I go out. I wear a mask when I'm leading worship here. I wash my hands regularly during the day. I monitor myself for symptoms. I have a closed circle of people that I interact with when I'm unmasked. I do all of those things that we were all supposed to do. I even wear a mask here. When people come in and tell me that it's fine, that they're okay, I still put on a mask out of an abundance of caution. That's why the hopelessness starts to set in. Because there's nothing that I can do to stop that, to stop the decisions that are made. And while it may not last long, each news cycle seems to give us a step forward or a step back. We hold on to a slim amount of hope, and then it seems to be taken away. Now, Hannah, our main character in today's biblical reading, did all that she was supposed to do from the little that we know about her. She went with her husband Elkanah on the annual pilgrimage to Shiloh. Now, Shiloh was an ancient religious center of Israel. It was located about 10 miles north of Bethel, to the east of Jerusalem, of the Jerusalem-Nablus Road. It is identified with modern Kirbet Salem, and it was the administrative and religious center for the Israelite tribes. And it was that way during the early settlement period of around the 12th century. Shiloh was the central sanctuary and seat of the priesthood until the ark was captured in the battle with the Philistines at Ebenezer. The ark was eventually not returned to Shiloh, and the city never regained its prestige. However, the annual pilgrimage that Hannah and her husband made would have been important. People would have gathered there, probably some who hadn't seen Hannah since last year, since the last pilgrimage. And it would have been another opportunity for people to identify her as being childless, as being barren. You know, I really hate that term. Partially because it feels hopeless. The way that barrenness is expressed, it feels as if it is an extreme situation. Partially, I also hate that term because of an underlying assumption that comes with it. See, Hannah is described as barren. However, it wasn't just women who were described as barren. Fields were also described as barren at times. Fields that could not produce any produce. For a woman, she was barren if she couldn't produce a child. So the basic concept of being barren is to be that which is unproductive. And that really grates on my nerves. Hannah may not have, at this point in our biblical story, been able to create a child, to give birth to a child, but to claim that she is unproductive is so limiting, so damaging, and so unfair. We hear that Elkanah had 2 wives, Hannah and Peninnah. Peninnah was able to give birth to children, yet Elkanah gave Hannah double the amount of food that he gave Peninnah. Why? Because he loved Hannah so much. It strikes me that what Hannah did produce was even more valuable than producing children. Hannah produced love. Imagine how hopeless it would be to spend each day being viewed as unproductive. Yet you're actually really great at producing the most important thing in the world, in producing love. Now we know that eventually God intercedes in the life of Hannah and she gives birth to Samuel. And the end of today's reading is a prayer, a song, a poem that is Hannah's response to all of this situation. And as I look at it, Hannah had a couple of possible responses to all that had gone on in her life. After Samuel was born, she could have cursed God for taking so long, for subjecting her to the ridicule, to the comments that would have been made because she was unable to birth a child. Or she could do as she did and rejoice that God had acted. Hannah in this prayer, in this song, in this poem, not only expressed love for Elkanah, but in this poem, she expressed love for God. That isn't always the easiest thing for us to do, to show love after we've been waiting for something for so long. And yet Hannah finds a way to do that. Often, we try to convince people who struggle through the difficult moments in life that God will act as God did with Hannah. God will eventually intercede. But those words in the midst of our struggles, seem hollow and don't really give much hope. Maybe the hope that we need, though, comes from looking at Hannah's reaction. In the midst of the hopeless moments of life, it can seem that the world is better at cursing God and cursing others for not acting, for acting too slowly, for not acting at all. But yet there are cases in our world where people act like Hannah, where they're thankful, where they express love. The other day on TSN, there was a really short documentary about one of the young players for Toronto FC. He's done quite well this year. But less than a decade ago, he was homeless. He and his mother had no place to live. His big commitment through all that he's done has been to make sure that his mother was never in that place again. And there are people in the world who would have been put in that situation, who would have blamed parents, blamed others, focused on the cursing. But this player doesn't. He focuses on his love for his mother. He focuses on what he can do. Love is that great gift that we get from God. It is love. It is the love of God, the love of others, that can really break through our hopeless moments. That love is what will give us hope for the world to come. And for that, we give thanks. Amen.